Are science and faith enemies? Your host for this series was an atheist who became a believer in God through his studies in science. Here is public high school teacher N Clayton.
Now, why is it that all these people that come out as creationists that are talking about science are high school teachers? Ian Dewey, Ken Hovind, N Clayton. It's funny that how they all claim to have scientific knowledge. Yeah, it's funny from a high school teacher. Then this guy's not even a scientific one, he's a theoretical high school teacher, whatever that fucking means.
I'd like to welcome you to the Does God Exist series of materials dealing with the existence of God. As a person who was an atheist for many years, and as a person who has taught in the public schools for some 41 years...
Here we go, ponage number 1 within seconds. Your title, Scientific Proof for God's Existence. Can anyone else spot it? I can. It's the fact he says scientific proof. No scientist, no one who studies science will ever say that they have scientific proof. They'll say they have evidence, unless they work in the field of mathematics. So, ponage number 1, within seconds.
I have a different perspective on some of these things than probably a lot of other people do. But I think it's important to understand why we're trying to do this. I generally get two kinds of skeptical reactions to the sort of things we try to do.
2 skeptical reactions, count them. 2. Shall we see how many we actually get?
One is the atheist who says, this is ridiculous. Nobody believes in God. Why should I waste my time looking at this kind of material?
So, apart from strawmanning the atheist viewpoint, you've also generalised all atheists as saying this. Nice move. Oh yeah. 2 fallacies in it, 1 stone. I mean, oh, what a genius. Amazing.
And I think that's rooted to a great extent in the fact that there's been a lot of stupidity out there. There's been a lot of bad arguments made.
Yes, there are. On the theist side and the atheist side. However, mostly by the theist side.
And I don't pretend to have all the answers, but I think there are some good arguments. And as a person who came to believe in God through my studies in science, I'd like to share with you some of the things that led me to move out of an atheistic orientation and into a believer one. For those of you who are perhaps already believers in God, there's another negative reaction that I sometimes get to these presentations, and that...
So wait, what happened to the other skeptical answer? I mean, you've kind of gone saying you had 2 skeptical reactions, and then you've gone, oh yes, and for those that sometimes believe. Or is this part 2 of your skeptical reactions? I'm not sure which. But, as we'll find out, it sounds very similar to what you say all atheists say.
It is, I believe in God. Why should I waste my time talking about this stuff? And I think there's 2 responses I'd like to make to that. The first one is...
Again, with the straw manning, with the generalization...
is, you need to know how to share your faith with others. And we live in a world where a lot of things are happening to cause people to have a lot of faith problems. And if we're to be ready to give an answer with the hope that is within us to every man, surely the question of how we know there's a God is part of that answer.
And the answer is, you don't. Simple as that.
But I think all of us have a problem with faith that reflects in how we act and what we do. I'd like to show you a little visual that I think represents the problems that we all have. We have a line here, sort of a sine wave line that goes up and down. And what that line represents is life. I don't know about you, but I have times when I have really good days. Man, everything's going great and I'm really on top of the world. And then there are those days when nothing goes right. And I really get pretty discouraged. I can become very, very negative about things.
Right, that's it. He's shown me a wavy line. I must believe now.
Life is highs and lows. And if you say, no, not me, I'm always just perfectly flat, I don't believe that. I think that people have hills and valleys. And in the Bible, for those of you who are believers, there's no question that the people who were instrumental in the establishment of the church and in following the teachings of Jesus had their highs and lows. I mean, look at Peter. One minute he's walking on the water, and the next minute it's, Lord, save me.
Ah yes, Peter walking on water. Matthew, I believe, was it not? Completely ignored in Mark and Luke. Yeah, another point where this Bible corroborates for itself, isn't it? Or, oh wait, no, I'm wrong, it doesn't.
One minute it says, I'll never deny you, and then the next minute the cock crows. Life is ups and downs, whether you're an atheist, whether you're a believer. And for people who are believers, there's a question of vulnerability. At the bottom of this visual, we have an area that is labeled unbelief level. We all have an unbelief level. In the Bible, we see people saying, like, Lord, help my unbelief. And I think it's important to understand that in today's world, there's lots of things that can push that unbelief level up, can increase it. Problems with a marriage, the death of somebody you love, the world situation, people doing stupid things that hurt you. Life has a tendency to produce unbelief in us.
He forgot to add no evidence whatsoever corroborating that the Bible is right and correct and true. That helps people become unbelievers as well.
And for many people, that unbelief level has increased to such a point where it really saturates their life. And that's really the atheist view, that the area of unbelief is so large, there's so much evidence for it, that it has become their dominant faith.
And there we have it. Someone who claims to be an atheist believing that atheism is a faith. If he was truly an atheist, he would know that it's just a lack of belief in any God. It's not a faith system. You don't hold any faith in this. You don't go, I believe there is no God. I believe there is no God. I believe there is no God. Oh, no God, please help me. I worship thee, no gods. No. It's just a simple case of, provide me evidence and I might believe, if it's satisfactory evidence. Until then, I'm going to carry on just not believing in any God whatsoever. As simple as that.
For those who are believers, there's a hope that we can push that unbelief level down. And I believe it's useful to look at a discussion like this with the idea of reducing our unbelief level, knowing how to answer the kinds of questions that would tend to produce unbelief. There's another perspective that I'd like to do as we introduce this series of videos, and that is that I think there's a mistaken concept of the relationship of faith and science, or how we view the Bible and science. And this visual sort of demonstrates what I think a lot of people believe. And I'm not restricting this to any particular group. I think you hear it from the pulpit. I think you see it in the media. And, of course, there are atheists that would love to present this perspective, and that is that science and faith are antagonists, that they're on a collision course. There are popularizers of science who have essentially said, you have to decide whether you're to be a well-educated, logical, intelligent, thinking, scientific person, or whether you're going to be a believer in God.
Thanks for pointing out that you don't deal in the real world if you believe in God. That you're not a thinking, logical person if you believe in God.
That these are opposing points of view. I think that's horribly destructive. As a teacher, I've had a lot of students over the years that struggle with this. I remember particularly one young man that I had in my class who was the son of a minister, and he was a terrific science student. He just had this tremendous natural ability to understand things scientifically, a tremendous mind with great quantitative analysis skills. And he was in getting some help one night on a problem in physics, and we worked through the problem, and then he saw it, and the little light came on, and he was, sort of enthusiastic. He said, man, I love this. I sure wish I could be a scientist. And I said, well, why can't you? I said, I would hope this would be your career. You're really good at this. He said, no. He said, I want to be a Christian. And you see, what had happened was that somehow along the line, he had gotten the idea that he had to make a choice. And as I say, that's a terribly destructive perspective. You see, what I would suggest...
Oh, would you look at that? A personal testimony. Oh, this guy's pulling out all the stops today. How very nice. Of course, He fails to think that it might have been his Christian daddy that said to him, you can either be a scientist or you can be a Christian. Do you? Do you think that's more often? Because that's what I see more often than anything else. I've never had a scientist come to me and say, you must be either a non-believer and believe in science and logical thinking, or you can be one of these creatards. But I have seen Christians come up to me and say, are you a believer? And I go, no. Why not? Well, there's no scientific evidence. You are the devil. You should believe in God. There's nothing else there for it. You gotta believe in God. Science is a lie. Which is a far more often thing to see. Oh, and we also managed to find out now which field you apparently taught in. Physics. This should be fun.
Suggest to you is that science and faith, science and our understanding of what the Bible says, are symbiotic relationships. They reinforce each other.
Well, that straight away is bullshit. Salt doesn't change flavour like Jesus said. Let me see what else. Medical science. Yeah, medical science. Yep, we've got the whole cure for leprosy. The Bible cure does not corroborate what medical science says for a cure for leprosy. In fact, there's nothing I know all that much that corroborates the Bible and science. Nothing at all. Oh, no doubt you're going to try and pull out some bullshit that you say will prove it. And this is getting really long, pal. When the fuck are you actually going to get to your argument?
They support each other. They aren't enemies. And I hope if you got nothing else out of this series of videos that we're hoping to get you to look at, that you'll see that there is a tremendous support for belief in God from the field of science. It led me to become a Christian. And I hope whether you're an atheist, whether you're an agnostic, whether you're a believer, that you'll find some things here that will be helpful and useful to you. Now, I'm not a philosopher. Well, we're all philosophers in a sense, but that's not my field of expertise. And so I just want to make one sort of general...
His field of expertise is bullshit. That's right. He's an expert bullshitter. Now, if his field of expertise is physics, as we're being led to believe so far by his personal testimony story, then it'll be interesting to see if a layman like me can destroy that, won't it? Because I don't do anything with physics. When it comes to physics, I'm not great. I'm more a biologist than anything else, with part-time chemistry on the side. But this should be fun.
Generalized philosophical perspective to get you to understand a little bit about where we're coming from. I'm making one assumption philosophically about the things that we're going to be talking about. And this is an assumption. I admit that. I won't debate it with you. I won't argue it with you. If you want to debate this, you have to argue it with somebody else. But now, before you get to feeling this is going to be some big, heavy, difficult subject, let me show you what it is. Yeah. I just want you to be willing to admit that you exist. That there is reality. Now, if you're watching this set of videos and if you don't believe you exist...
Wow, what an assumption. I mean, that must be a really difficult assumption. Here's the thing. If you're watching this video, I want you to assume that this guy's a fucking tool. It won't be a hard assumption. Just like assuming you exist is not a hard assumption. I mean, for fuck's sake, pal. No one assumes thinks they don't fucking exist. They may wax lyrical on philosophy of whether or not we actually exist or are we a dream state of something, but that's philosophy. That is not what everyone fucking thinks.
You got bigger problems than I want to deal with. And I fully understand that there's a valid philosophical perspective to this question. I run into this all the time. We're doing a series of lectures in a college or a university, and almost always somebody will raise this question. Well, how do you know you exist? And I understand the philosophical perspective, but I suggest to you that's not the way we make decisions. If you're standing in the middle of a street and a cement truck is bearing down on you, you don't stand there pondering the reality of your existence. You get out of the road.
Or your brain completely shuts down and you stop thinking and you're just standing there going, ugh! That's the whole point about being frozen in the headlights. It's what animals do, it's what humans do. We don't always react instantaneously.
That's a practical, pragmatic approach to major questions. And that's what I'm asking you to apply here. You say, well, you can't prove God exists. Well, that's true in an absolute sense. In an absolute sense, you can't prove you exist. You say, well, look at me. And I say, well, how do I know you're not just a fancy hologram? I mean, if you want to play those kinds of games...
Are we going into Red Dwarf territory here where there's a hard light and a soft light holograms? Because if it's just a fancy hologram, you can fucking touch them. We don't have the technology to make hard light bodies. We don't have the technology to make soft light bodies. But, anyway... Never mind that, time is fleeting on, it's 15 minutes, I was just going to make this a 15-minute video, but this guy's taking forever to get to even one point of his argument. So I'm going to carry on to about the 20-minute mark, maybe 25-minute mark. Sorry, folks.
And I think they are games. They're mental games, that's not a negative. But if you want to play those kind of games, then you really can't prove your own existence. But again, I say to you, that's not the way we make decisions. So no, we're not talking absolute proof here. But what we're talking about is the weight of the evidence. And what I'd like to do is to show you a logical approach that I believe can be used in dealing with this question of how we know there's a God, what the evidence is. And this isn't going to be a biblical argument. It's not going to be a heavy philosophical approach. It's not going to be a major theological approach, although all of those things are obviously involved in anything we discuss. It's just going to be a basic, common sense, practical look at the questions. And so let's pursue this a little bit. If you admit that you exist, then I suggest that there are two possibilities about how that existence came into being. The top statement is a statement from a document put out by an atheistic group. And I think it eloquently summarizes the atheist position. That doesn't mean every atheist would agree with it, but I think it's a pretty concise statement of some of the fundamentals of atheist belief.
There is no atheist belief. As an atheist, I could believe anything I like, as long as it doesn't involve the supernatural, i.e. God. Anything that is deity-like. Any deities, if I am an atheist as soon as I start believing in a deity, is bollocks. Sorry, I'm not an atheist if I start to believe in any deity. I'm an atheist if I don't believe in any deity. I could believe that fairies created the world and universe. They're not gods. I could just believe that they created the world, they created the universe, I'd still be an atheist. Dear me. So no, it's not central to atheist dogmatic belief. That is the current scientific explanation, which is backed by evidence.
The bottom statement is not offered as a proof of anything, and let me emphasize that. You know, when I was an atheist...
Yes, it is. Quite often, by creationists. They, as far as they're concerned, believe that God created the heaven and the earth. And they will cite it again and again in the Bible. And then they'll go off and try and create some bullshit story about why. But it is offered as proof, because it's in the Bible. Be in the Bible there, don't you hear? It be in the Bible. Only a non-believer, only Satan himself wouldn't believe what's in the Holy Bible.
I used to find that people somehow felt that if they quoted Scripture to me as an atheist, that was going to convince me about something. And I know that there are passages that talk about belief comes from hearing and hearing from the Word of God, but I think the context of that passage is different than what we're dealing with here. And if you're an atheist, I want to say to you, I'm not going to attempt to prove anything to you by quoting Scripture. So that's not why this is up. It is up because I think it is a very clear, concise statement, and especially in the original language, a concise statement of what those who believe in God hold to be true. So now let's take a look at each one of these. In the very first statement, we'll come back to these periodically as we go along in the development of our logical argument. The universe is eternal. Now, the important point here is that an atheist will maintain everything has always been basically as it is. Matter energy never had a beginning. It will never have an end. So
here we go again. Creationist tactic number 105. Conflate atheism and scientific viewpoint as one and the same. Because, of course, you'll find that's what a scientist may say. A physicist, a real scientist, pal, not your bullshit, theoretical, high school teaching. I didn't know they had a theory class in America. as a part of the high school course. I mean, generally that's covered in scientific classes as a general theories, you know, these things that are created after observed evidence and repeatable testing, peer review, you know, all these parts which provide the best way forward for logical scientific thinking. So an atheist would not just come out and say, the matter and energy are the same, man. It's like obvious. No. An atheist could say it, but not all atheists say it. It's not, we don't have a dogma. We don't have a dogmatic view. As an ex-atheist, you should apparently know this.
Well, the concept is that everything has basically always been in the form that it is, perhaps has changed forms from energy to matter or from some conceptual position to another, but that everything has always been, there was no beginning. Now, if you're a religious person looking at this, and if you say, well, that's kind of crazy, as an atheist, I would say to you, well, where did God come from? And if you were to say to me, well, God has always been, then my question to you has to be, why is it any more reasonable to believe that God has always been than it is to believe that matter has always been? And this was eloquently stated many years ago by Carl Sagan in his book Cosmos. So I think it's important to recognize that the atheist has a very valid position here, a good question. And in one of our later videos, we will talk about, where did God come from? Because I think that's a valid question and one that is important in understanding the nature of God. But that's not our subject right now. Right now I just want to point out to you, you can't just blow this off. Now there's another perspective. And the other perspective, as we said, is taken from the Bible. But let's take a quick look at the literal meaning of these words. And what we've done in this chart is that we have taken the first 5 words of Genesis and we have shown what the Hebrew word for each of those English statements is, the meaning that is given for these words taken from a lexicon, and how many times it is used that way. Now, the reason this is brought up is because the Hebrew word reshith is an eloquent statement of the opposing position to what we just saw. The word reshith literally refers to something that never existed before. So in short, the Bible is maintaining there was a beginning. So the atheist says there was no beginning. The believer says there was a beginning. This is a nice, clear, contradictory set of beliefs.
And you're talking bullshit. All the atheist says is that I don't believe in God. An atheist may argue against your God. Absolutely, they may argue against your God, your version of your God, using science. That's perfectly normal. Or using your book against you. That's also perfectly normal and fairly easy to do, to be honest. But that's not what an atheist would say. That's not something that atheism would say, because there is no such thing as an atheistic dogma. As an ex-atheist, you should know this. I mean, you even you're pwning yourself back. I don't even have to do it anymore. I really don't.
How do we answer the question? My response to that is, look at the scientific evidence. And what we propose to do in the rest of this video and in the next one is to show you some of that evidence.
You mean I've wasted all this time on an introduction? I'm now at a 25-minute mark in this video. There's some like 12 minutes left. So you're telling me that with a 25-minute video that I'm taking apart, 15 of that is your fucking introduction. And fuck me, is it a waffling thing? Never mind. I shall persevere. Part 2 will be up later on, when I look at his scientific evidence that he's going to apparently propose